Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today we are chatting with Weekly 50 photographer Simon Ringsmuth about how to balance family, life, and photography. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
All right, welcome back, photo friends. It is me, Raymond Hatfield. I'm your host, as always, and I'm excited to be here. We got a great episode for you this week. But first, have you heard the good news? You know that I use and love CloudSpot to deliver my images to clients, and honestly, even family and friends when we have a get-together. CloudSpot is made by photographers. In fact, Gavin Wade is an award-winning Southern California wedding photographer who just found that, his clients loved how he took care of them, but then simply had a ton of questions once the delivery process went into place, and it just wasn't as seamless as it could have been. So he started CloudSpot, which I think is awesome because if anybody's going to know what photographers need, it's a photographer. So what makes CloudSpot awesome is that last month they introduced the ability to integrate in an album builder. So now you can, or your client can actually create their own album from the photos that you deliver, like a full proper album builder, with the spread by spread. You drag and drop templates to make beautiful albums. It couldn't be easier. And honestly, it's a fantastic way to show your clients that you got their back and make a little bit of extra revenue at the same time. So you cannot go wrong there. And the best part is that it's just included with your CloudSpot account. And even the free account. Yeah, if you have a free CloudSpot account, you can also build albums. You get access to the album builder. Truly fantastic stuff. So excited. And I think that you should give them a try. I think that CloudSpot is a fantastic tool for photographers to level up your delivery game and deliver photos to your friends, your family, and your clients. So you can do so. You can try CloudSpot out by signing up at try.cloudspot.io/BPP for Beginner Photography Podcast, or you can just click the link in the show notes. I promise you're going to love it. So this week, I chat with return guest Simon Ringsmuth, who has been doing a weekly photo project for the past 8 years. Yeah, incredible stuff, 8 years. I don't think I've done anything consistently for 8 years, and here he is just blowing it out of the water, consistently taking photos. Wonderful stuff. And today he talks about, how to stay motivated and balance family, life, work with photography because, we have busy schedules. We have a lot of things that we need to do, and photography can sometimes be seen as a hobby and that it kind of gets put on the back burner. So he talks about the balance of how to take care of those things and also some of the challenges that he faced last year during the pandemic and feeling burnt out and all that stuff, and how he has reclaimed some of that creative energy to move forward and take better photos for the year ahead. So again, I know that you're really going to love this interview, and if you want to know more about Simon's Weekly 50 project and his blog, then you can check out episode 202 of the podcast to hear all about that, the blog, challenges, and everything that come from a weekly photo project. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into this interview with Simon Ringsmuth. Simon, I know last time that you were on, we talked about your weekly photo project, which I love. And now you've been doing it for 8 years, which is incredible. So congratulations.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so much fun. Can you came back on last year. Can you remind us all how you kind of got started with the weekly photo project and how it got to where you are today?
Thank you for asking, Raymond. So the Weekly 50 Photo Project has been, I started it in 2013. So yeah, it's now been over 8 years. And it started kind of like a lot of photo projects start. I had a spark of inspiration and a new camera. And I thought, I'm going to do something cool and fun and amazing with this. And I didn't want to overextend myself. and get in too deep, and then it wasn't sustainable. So I came up with the idea of doing a weekly photo project where at the time I had a Nikon D200 was my camera, and I didn't know how to work it. So I thought, well, what better way to learn how to use my camera than make myself use the camera and make sure it doesn't sit on the shelf. So I started taking photos and putting them on my on this blog I created, Weekly 50. And the idea was every week I would post a photo. And I didn't really have an end point in mind. And that was a good thing, because I think some people have this mindset of I'm gonna learn XYZ, and then I have learned it, and now I'm gonna do something else. And for me, there's always more to learn with photography. So here I am 8.5 years later, I'm still doing it because I still have a lot to learn. And I don't really see any end point from here. I hope to continue it indefinitely. And it's still the exact same. Nothing at all has changed from when I started. It's the same. One photo every Wednesday morning at 1 a.m. And I post the same photo and audio commentary on YouTube. And if anyone wants to follow me on YouTube, just go to YouTube and type Weekly 50. I think I come up, I don't know, but you'll find my site is weekly50.com, and it's the word FIFTY. And you can subscribe to my blog, or you can subscribe to me on YouTube. And it's very simple, just one photo a week with audio and written commentary. And I don't do it for anyone. There's no ads, there's no sponsors. It's just for me, to help me learn more about photography. And I've heard from a lot of people who have learned from me over the years on the blog. And I've been able to help others learn as well. So that's the gist of Weekly 50.
You know what I love so much is that, first of all, like, you're very genuine in your reasons as to why you started the blog and wanting to learn photography. But I would love to know, photography in and of itself, like once you figure out that it's more than just pressing a button, can feel a bit overwhelming once you understand how much truly goes into it. Why did you decide, I'm going to throw creating a blog and maintaining a blog on top of that? What was the point?
I wanted to, I've always had an itch to write. And when I went to school in college so I could be an English teacher. I've always enjoyed writing. I wrote for the school paper in college. I've enjoyed the writing process. I used to have a movie review blog called Walking Taco, which I think still exists, but I haven't been there in years. I keep renewing the domain name every year when it comes up. And that was just me and some friends reviewing movies. And that didn't have the same like creative hook as photography. So I thought, well, I can combine these two. I can combine photography and writing and make that more of a creative pursuit where I'm doing both of these things that I really enjoy. And sometimes I write a lot, sometimes for the Weekly 50, sometimes not very much. But I realize in 2021, blogs are ancient. Nobody does a blog anymore. But I keep it up because my reasons are all personal. I do this for me. And if it helps other people, if other people are interested, great. I would love to have you as a reader and a subscriber on YouTube or whatever. But really, I don't do this for external motivation. I'm not externally motivated to do this. I do it for me. And that's how I can keep this going and combine both of those interests, both writing and photography.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of work, as you said, like it takes a bunch. So you're a busy guy. I know that you got a family, you got a full-time job, you got kids with activities. So tell me how the photography aspect kind of fits into your life. Is this more, because I feel like there's always the two camps, at least with people with kids and families. It's either you take your camera with you wherever you go and you're just taking photos of the kids, or you're like going out and specifically making plans for the type of photos that you want. Where do you lie on that scale?
That's an interesting scale, because I think this is something that a lot of photographers try and balance. So it's a good question to ask. One thing about Weekly 50 is you'll never see a photo of my kids' faces on there. Every now and then I'll put like a silhouette of one of my kids, or you'll see them Earlier this month or earlier this year, there's a photo of them where they're standing looking out on a frozen lake. So you could see kind of their silhouettes almost. It wasn't totally black and white, but I don't show my kids' face because it's not about sharing my kids with the world. I don't like the idea that I'm using my kids to promote my own photography. And that's just a personal thing. And everyone has to answer this question for themselves. But for me, I realize I'm more interested in exploring the creative use of the photography tools, just the basics, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. And then when I'm out with my kids, I've learned a lot about those things, so I can get better photos of my kids as a result. So we were on vacation in Kansas earlier this summer, and the things that I have learned through Weekly 50 help me take better photos of my kids at the beach and the cousins and everything else. And I try to kind of keep those two separate. My blog really isn't about showing off my kids and my family. And if you find me on Instagram, it's the same way. My Instagram is my Weekly 50. It's not pictures of my kids and my family and like, look at all the fun we're having, that we're curating these images to make it seem like we're living an awesome life. It's my Instagram. Usually I forget to, but I post my whatever photos on Weekly 50 that goes on Instagram. Because I keep my family photos sort of just for me and my wife and our kid, that those aren't for public consumption beyond just the people we share those things with. But I really do, I believe in taking those lessons from photography and applying those in other ways, like taking pictures of my kids, and even things like lighting. If you're out in the backyard with your kids, well, where's the sun coming from? Is it over here? Well, then I should probably stand over here. What aperture should I use? Well, I took this photo of a flower and the other flower wasn't in focus. I needed a smaller aperture. So when my kids are running around, I should probably use a smaller aperture if I want them both in focus. Those kinds of questions, they come into play all the time. And so even though Weekly 50 is not about my family and my kids, it has helped me in a huge number of ways, like many ways, become a better photographer for just taking casual shots of my kids and the people in my life.
Of course. If we were to look though at your personal, say, Lightroom catalog, are you using Lightroom?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we were to look at your own Lightroom catalog, personal photos and all, we look at Weekly 50, there's lots of, beautiful birds, there's, nature shots, there's a gamut of photos. But I want to know, because I know that the majority of people listening they're going to be shooting those things, but then they're also going to be photographing their family. So when it comes to taking photos of your family, say the kids, when you went on the trip with the kids, what photos do you take of them? Is it when they're in some sort of interesting situation, or is it, more of a, oh, we're going to go visit this one thing today, and I want to try to put this photo together and make it, something special? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. It's a great question. So I've gone through, like a lot of photographers, I've gone through different, I guess you could call it, periods in my photography where I'm interested in this and interested in this. And when in January of 2018, I got my favorite camera of all time, which is a Fuji X100F. And I got it because it's a 35 millimeter equivalent focal length, an f2.0 lens, and small enough to carry with you. Pretty much it's not quite a pocket camera, but it's close. And with that camera, I got it so I could take pictures of the people in my life, not so I could take nature shots, sunsets and birds and everything else. I got it as a people camera to take photos of people in my life. And I went through this time where that was like the only camera I used. And for a while, if you go on Weekly 50, by the way, the 50 refers to the 50 millimeter focal length. I started it with a 50 millimeter lens, and now I kind of use.
Sorry about that. Jeez.
Well, that's fine.
Sorry. The phone went off, and oh my gosh, I swear, this past week I've had the worst luck with all these phones, and they're all on silent. I apologize. I am so sorry. Go on.
That's the entire past year where you think everything is on silent and do not disturb, and then it interrupts your meeting. So no worries.
That is it.
So the 50 millimeter refers to the focal length. When I started, it was just a 50 millimeter lens is all I had. And that's why I called it Weekly 50. And then I've since branched out. I don't really care what focal length I use. If it's an interesting photo, I'll put it on the blog. But after I got my Fuji X100F, I used that as kind of my primary camera for a long time. And the photos that I put in 2018 and 2019, a lot of those were taken with that Fuji. But I realized I didn't find it that interesting from a creative standpoint for the photos I want to take that are not my kids.
Yeah.
That camera is awesome if you like photographing people in your life. And when I'm photographing for more creative shots, artistic shots, even just a flower or a bird or something, that's when I bust out the 50 millimeter or some of the big guns. If we're just hanging out with family at the lake, my Lightroom catalog, if you were to sort by camera, most of the photos of the people in my life were taken with that Fuji X100F. And they're not artistic. They're just like, you could even call them snapshots, because it's just like sitting around at the cabin, sitting around the beach, going for a walk. I used that Fuji to capture moments in time that help me remember things that I did and people that I love, not to create beautiful works of art. And that's kind of the I don't know, that's where I ended up, where if I want pictures of people, I'm not generally trying to create works of art unless it's a portrait session for a client, which I do occasionally. And every now and then, if my kids are doing something, like it was raining the other day, and so I got my D500 and I took some pictures of them in the rain and kind of some portrait style shots. And I like having the tools to be able to do that. But mostly I just like, when I'm with people, I like to kind of blend in and capture the scene. And that Fuji is like the best camera in the world at doing that. And it's, if you're used to a mobile phone, it's a similar focal length, but the photos you get are infinitely superior to a mobile phone. Even the latest iPhone 12 Pro Max, it's still, that Fuji just wins hands down every time.
So that's funny, because that was actually going to be my next question. If the photos that you're taking are, self-described as snapshots, I guess what is what's the reasoning behind worrying about the quality of the image, over, say, a mobile phone? Like, why is the Fuji important enough to invest in that rather than just using the phone in your camera, or the camera in your phone rather?
Yeah, and one thing about shooting with a mobile phone versus a dedicated camera, whether it's the Fuji or something else. Let's just say you put a 35 millimeter lens on any full frame camera. That's the same as a Fuji X100. That line of cameras, I think it's now on the X100V. But if you're capturing like a similar scene with either a iPhone or an Android phone or a $1,000 camera, why would you bring the $1,000 camera? What does that bring to the table? I've realized that having the Fuji, and I'll just say specifically the Fuji, but if anyone has, I'm not saying you have to buy that camera, but if you have a camera and lens that you like to use, especially one with a little wider focal length, like 28 to 35, that's fine. For me, it's the Fuji, but whatever works for you, works for you. So when I'm using that Fuji, you can blow out the aperture to 2.0 and create this sense of depth that the person, if it's my son and my wife and they're playing a game, or we're all playing a game and I grab the camera, I can get my son's eye tack sharp in focus. And then even if I'm like 5-10 feet away, and then if I shoot at f2 behind him, you'll see this subtle fall off in focus. And it creates this sense of a 3D space that doesn't happen on a mobile phone. And
Mhm.
it's almost physically impossible. I say physically because the physics of shooting a picture on a mobile phone, the sensor is so tiny that any depth of field, almost any depth of field, is artificially created by the algorithms inside the phone, which is fine for a portrait style shot. But if you're just capturing a scene, people sitting around a campfire, people sitting around watching a soccer game or something, the image you get out of a big sensor like the one in the Fuji is an APS-C size sensor with a big f2 lens or aperture on your lens. It creates a richness and a depth to the photo, and it's not fake. It's not like a feeling. It's literally there. You can see there's a focal plane where everything is in focus, and in front and behind is out of focus, and you cannot do that on a mobile phone. You can kind of fake it, but it's not there. And maybe we'll get there years from now, but it just doesn't happen. And also with the dedicated camera, you can get much faster shutter speeds in low light situations. And mobile phones, you have night mode, which is awesome if nobody is moving.
Right.
If you want to get a picture of like, my brother went to Disney and he took a picture of Cinderella's castle at night. He's like, wow, the night mode's amazing. Well, yeah, Cinderella's castle isn't moving.
So are all the people just like, are they trails, or can you not see
all
any
the
people?
are trails.
Man.
But the castle is perfectly still. So of course you're going to get a great shot of that.
Yeah.
But if my kids are playing in the yard and it's sunset, or we're indoors and it's not great lighting because it's 9:30 at night, a mobile phone, the sensor is so small, it can't let much light in. And if your subjects are not moving, great. But if they're moving, you're going to get a blurry photo. There's almost no way around it. But with a dedicated camera like the Fuji or a DSLR mirrorless camera with a wide aperture lens, it lets in so much light that you can freeze that moment when your kids are running around, even in low light. Bump the ISO way up to 6400, shoot with a fast, like 125th of a second shutter. Even in low light, you'll be fine. And you'll get these great images that you just can't get with a mobile phone. And I don't mean to say, like, I've got my iPhone right next to me. I use my phone, but it's great. But if I'm talking about photography and family and taking pictures of the people in my life that matter most, my mobile phone doesn't quite cut it. And the pictures I get from my phone, they lack that richness and that clarity, that tack sharp, where every eyelash is in focus. You can get that with a dedicated camera, but you just can't quite get it with a mobile phone. It's not there yet. So.
It's funny. I found, pretty much the exact same thing that you're saying is that, like, one thing that I love, I carry the X100 as well. And I love, obviously, being able to take those snapshots. So that question was, one of those devil's advocate type questions right there, because I'm exactly the same as you. I'd much rather take a photo on my Fuji than I would with my phone. But I've realized that, like, when you have, say, the Fuji, you got, your nice camera with you, and it's not the phone. For one, you're a whole lot less distracted, because on a phone, like, there's just naturally going to be notifications and whatnot. But then also, I like to compartmentalize things. Like, I have a dedicated camera for X, a dedicated camera for Y, a dedicated camera for, whatever it is. So when I'm using, say, my Fuji, I will be in a different headspace, and I will see things differently. I will, maybe it's, just the photographer in you that feels like this is real. Like, this isn't just going to be a snapshot. This is going to be something more than that. And then you have the flexibility to, as you said, take that portrait, get more creative with it, get somebody close and have a nice large aperture and blow out that background and still have that flexibility. So I'm right there with you. I can't, recommend it highly enough to be able to walk around and do something like that.
So we're going to change the name of your podcast to the Fuji Photographer Podcast.
Oh man, I've thought about it, but I think Kevin Mullins would be pretty upset with that.
Yeah, I think
with
so.
The Fuji cast he's got.
Well, there's something about I don't want to get off on like a starry-eyed nostalgic tangent here, but since you mentioned this about putting yourself in the headspace, one thing that I found when I take a photo with any dedicated camera, whether it's my Fuji or another camera, is any modern mirrorless camera, you can just hold it up. You don't need to, you don't need to use the viewfinder, which is great. But I find myself intentionally using the viewfinder because I feel like it's more intimate. I'm more connected to this image I'm creating. And a phone, you just hold it up and you hold it out in front of you and take the picture. But then, like you said, you've got notifications and other things to distract you. But it's also like it's removed from you by a couple feet. But if you hold your camera up to your eye, then all you can see is the scene you're photographing. You literally can't see anything else except just what is going to be on that photo. And it's a different kind of feeling. This is the part that cannot be quantified. There is a literal quantifiable difference in the physics of how a dedicated camera takes a photo versus a mobile phone. But there are some ethereal elements that you cannot quantify. And this is one of those, to me, the feeling that you get, the personal connection between what you're photographing and how you're making that photograph when you use the viewfinder. And any, most cameras today have both an LCD screen on the back and a viewfinder. So you get to decide which one you want to use. And that's great. And that's one of the best parts about shooting with a dedicated camera like the Fuji is I feel more connected, especially if it's the people that I'm photographing and not just some plants or something. I feel like the final result, I'm more personally present in that photo. I don't know.
Right. I don't think I could have said that any better myself. Yeah, it's a hard thing to put into words for sure, but I think that you did a good job there. I think you did a good job. One of the things that I hear a lot from listeners is that, these are photographers who are just getting started in photography and they have a hard time it's difficult for them making time for photography, being, working full time, having that family, having extra activities and whatnot. How do you think you've been able to keep up and shoot consistently for more than 8 years now?
So if I go back and look at my early photos that I took when I first got that D200, everything was awesome. Sort of like that Lego movie, everything is awesome. And except I can't sing, so I won't do that.
Yeah.
But everywhere I looked, there was a photo just waiting to be taken, like a jar of pens. I'm going to take that photo, a ceiling tile. I'm going to take that photo. And there was this sense of wide-eyed wonderment, kind of like when Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler step off the Jeep in the original Jurassic Park, and they look up and they see that Brachiosaurus. And it's just this moment of inspirational wonderment. That was me when I first got a camera. Everything was a photo opportunity. And then I kind of lost that. And I started to get kind of complacent, and I might have taken what I thought was a cool photo one week. And then the next week I'm like, I don't want to, that's a boring photo now. I want to do something better. I want to do something cooler. And when you start down that mental path, it leads to burnout pretty quick because you can't consistently keep topping yourself. If you're always searching for something better and more interesting and more exciting and more awesome, you're going to hit a point where it's impractical, especially for someone with family and kids. Right. And even with your kids grow up when they're just a couple months old, you want to take pictures of them all day long because everything they do is just a miracle, whether they're picking their nose or something, like they're your newborn kid. And so everything is a photo worthy. But now my kids are 10 and 7 and I don't have that same sense of wonderment at everything they do. And so that's one thing that I've tried to consciously recapture is get myself back to that mental headspace where it doesn't have to be an award-winning photo. I don't have to be making art for a museum or selling images to National Geographic. Maybe my kid is just sitting there eating breakfast. Maybe he's still picking his nose. And that's a perfectly valid photo to take. I can still take that picture, and it's not bad or unworthy of being photographed just because I have repeated that photo many times over the years. If I wanted to click that shutter, and I shouldn't let myself tell myself that I can't do that. And I work at Oklahoma State University, and literally across the street from my office, there's a pond, and they call it Theta Pond. And so many of my pictures on the blog I take when I'll take a 5-minute break from work, walk around the pond, and sure enough, there's a flower, or there's a magnolia tree, or there's a duck or something. 0 of these photos are going to win awards. But by making myself take that little break and just walk around and see the same sights that I've seen for years, but with my camera, taking pictures of, maybe it's a yellow flower instead of a red flower this time, it keeps me in that headspace where I'm trying to continually see the world with those same eyes as I did when I got my camera. That, you know what, that tree stump over there, that's a different tree stump than it was than what I photographed last month. So I'm going to take that photo just because I want to. And this duck that's sitting on the sidewalk, everybody who comes to campus takes pictures of the ducks. That doesn't mean I can't. And I've already got 100 pictures of ducks, but I'm still going to take a picture of that duck just because. And it's almost like giving ourselves permission to take photos that are not great, that are boring, and other people might think are, they would just scroll right past them on Instagram. That's okay. Take that photo anyway. And if you can keep that mindset going, there's no end point to what you can do as a photographer. But I feel the same way, like during the pandemic, especially, I felt like everyone else is doing these amazing things, going on trips, maybe just with their families, like living these awesome lives. And I'm just like here in Oklahoma, like working from home, trying to help my kids with their homework. And it was kind of creatively draining. And how do you keep that spark alive when you've got all this other stuff going on? And for me, I still don't know if I have the answer, but one thing that helped was just give myself permission to make boring photos, but I'm still using that camera. And boring is subjective. I might think it's interesting. Someone else might think it's boring. I don't care. I'm going to take the picture anyway, even if it's just a ball sitting on the floor or a toy or something. So yeah, I don't know. That's it's kind of where I've been.
I get it. I'm trying to wonder here, because I remember back to, like, my earliest days in photography, and like you were saying earlier, it's like when you first get started, everything is so exciting, right? Yeah. And like everything that you do is so new. And then eventually you get to a point to where, I've been doing this for a while, and things can start to get boring, which you were saying. And I find, especially now, like, if I go out and I don't have a clear objective, sometimes I can feel lost in the photos that are going to be taken. When you go out, do you try to look for something specific? You mentioned, just walking around the pond, Theta Pond. There's a tree, there's a flower, there's some ducks. Do you go out and, okay, so let me rephrase this question. You said that you have to give yourself permission to take boring photos, which I'm all on board for. I totally get that. Do you just start off with whatever I see in front of my camera? That's what I'm taking a photo of, and then it grows from there? Then I can explore from there. Then the creativity flows from there? Or is the purpose of that simply just to keep doing the reps, keep, pressing the shutter button, and just keep photography front of mind?
It's interesting you ask that, because there's a mini process that I go through a lot, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I talk about this a lot on the blog. If you look at some of the photos there and look at some of the commentaries, often what'll happen, let's say to use an example, about a month ago, I was doing exactly what we just talked about. I took a 5-minute break sometime in the afternoon, went to the pond, and there was nothing. Like there was not any, I was not feeling it. And I was just like walking around. I had my D750 and I wasn't feeling any inspiration at all, even for boring photos. And then I saw this little patch of flowers, cone flowers. And I stood over them, took a picture, and you could just hear the sad trombone sound effect, like womp womp. Boring photo, but I didn't care. Like I took the photo anyway. But then I paused for a second. And I thought, okay, well, what can I do to make this a more interesting photo? And I started adjusting my angle. So I got down low and I used the flip out view screen on the back to get my camera at a different angle. And then I started noticing the background. And if I position myself to one side a little bit and then over to the other side, the background would change and I could control what the background looked like because of the aperture control on my DSLR. And so I'm taking shots, adjusting the aperture a little bit to make it maybe a little more sharp, a little more adjust the depth of field. So do I want all the flower in focus or just a tiny sliver of it? And then looking at the background closely to think, well, what element of the background would make this flower look the best? And here's a brighter spot. Here's a darker spot with some trees. What if I shifted myself over 6 inches so that the subject is now framed with this brighter spot behind it? And I literally, this is going through my mind as I'm walking around the pond, had no inspiration, didn't have any ideas for a photo, saw a couple flowers, and it was like, it went from the most boring, average photo of a flower that you'd ever see to what I think is a pretty good picture of a flower. It's still not going to be, it's not going to win awards, but I literally went through that process you just described where the first picture I took it was bad. And then I knew there was something in there. Like I knew I could make something out of this. And so I just tried a little harder. And that's what I see often is that's the difference where I'll be walking around, and to any beginner photographer out there who's listening to this, who wants to know, like, what can I do to just make things a little more interesting and exciting with my photos? Take a second, look at what you're photographing and consider it from different angles and different settings. And if it's something as simple as a flower on the ground, what can you do to make that a more interesting photo? What if you shifted your point of view from, instead of standing on the sidewalk looking straight down, what if you crouch down? What if you lay down on the ground, which I've done, and a lot of photographers have done. You literally just lay down on the ground and point your camera up at the flower. What about the background? Is it too bright? Okay, scoot over a second. So maybe it's a darker background, and now the brighter colors of the flower stand out more. But consider your subject more than just that one picture. Take a minute and examine it from a different angle or under a different light and see what you can do with that, maybe a boring photo, to turn it into something a little more interesting. And chances are there's a lot of things that you can do with everyday objects in the room, wherever you're listening to this photo or this podcast. You can find things to photograph in interesting ways. You just have to consider it a little bit more than just take a photo and run. And I think we see that a lot. We see people falling into that trap. I fall into this trap where you see something interesting, grab your phone, take a quick snapshot. What you thought in your mind isn't quite represented on your phone. So maybe you add so maybe you add a filter and you add a border, or you add an emoji to it or something. But maybe there's something else you can do from a photography standpoint to make that scene more interesting, that subject a little more interesting. And you might be, not you, Raymond, but you, a beginner photographer who's listening to this, you might be surprised at what you can do by learning those fundamentals. Control the aperture of your camera, control the angle at which you shoot your subject, control the lighting. You can't make the sun move, but you can move yourself. All of these tools help keep that spark alive and help I live in a small town. people often say, well, there's nothing to do. There's tons to do. Maybe not as much as Dallas, Texas, or New York City, but you just got to keep your eyes open and look for things to do. And that's kind of what it is for photography. I hear people falling into the trap of, it's nothing to photograph around here. There's a ton of stuff to photograph. Just got to look for it. And then if you don't think it's worthy of being photographed, maybe it is. You just need to change how you're looking at it.
Right. Oh, that's so good. Especially because, there is a lot of pressure, I think, for photographers to just like go out, find something, and then just kill it the first shot.
Yes.
Right? First photo you go out, it's got to be amazing. But what you described, I mean, I go through that every time, and I hope that other people do as well, where you go out and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And then you take a photo and then you just adjust from there and then keep adjusting until you get something that you like. And I think that perfectly, wraps into what you're saying there about, like, if you think that you live in a boring place, prove everybody wrong. Go out and try to make it different. Take the boring photo, but then adjust and then adjust and then adjust until suddenly you live in the coolest place in the entire world that everybody wants to come and visit because of your photos. That is so awesome to think about. I'm gonna have to get out after this and focus on that on my next Fuji photo walk. That's gonna be great. So
yeah,
I remember. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, there's also some really, I don't like to say, well, the solution is buy more gear. But there's my favorite camera upgrade that I recommend to anyone is a set of close-up filters. Mm-hmm. And you can go to Amazon, B&H, you'll find them for whatever lens you have for like $25. And it's a screw-on magnifying glass or 2 or 3 that you can just screw onto the front of your lens. Suddenly you can take really close-up photos. And if you want to see the familiar world around you in a different way, screw on a close-up filter. And they take some work. It doesn't make your lens suddenly a macro lens. Depth of field gets really tricky, but it will automatically turn everything around you into this crazy world of close-up photography that was always there, you just didn't know about. And if there's anyone listening who just feels like creatively tapped out, get yourself a set of close-up filters for $25-$30. Or if you have a tripod, get a neutral density filter for $10-$15 and experiment with long exposures, even in broad daylight. It's really cool to upgrade your photography with very little money. So
that was one of those things that you said that you wanted to work on more this year, was working with long exposures, more neutral density stuff. Can you tell me about how that's going and maybe an example of a photo and how it turned out?
I absolutely can. So I have in the Fuji, there's a 3-stop ND filter, which is now, if you buy the Fuji X100V, I think it's a 4-stop ND filter. And it's a great way to make longer exposures, even in broad daylight. And one of my favorite things to do is smooth out motion in water. So if there's a stream, you can make that stream look kind of glassy if you leave the shutter open for a couple seconds, which you can do with the neutral density filter. I have also got, I went and got like a 10-stop ND filter, which is, I think I had to spend $50 just on this one filter, but it lets you take really long exposures, even in broad daylight. And I recently took my favorite sunset photo that I've ever taken with this, and I was able to take it with this ND filter, this 10-stop ND filter. And I was up at the vacation I just mentioned in Kansas. There was a sunset over the lake, and my sister-in-law mentioned to me, it was like 8:30. She said, "Hey, the sun looks great tonight. You should go and take a picture." And so I ran behind the cabin we were staying at, and sure enough, there was this beautiful sunset. Take out your phone, snap a picture, and it just looks crummy.
Yeah, like you took a photo on a cell phone.
Yes. I thought, well, I can make this better. So I got my D750, my 50mm lens, and my 10-stop ND filter, and I took a 30-second exposure of that sunset. And I'm telling you, it's my personal favorite sunset photo I've ever taken.
Wow!
Because it's I'll send it to you after we record here. But it took what I saw, and elevated it to something even better. And most of the time it's the inverse. What you see, especially with a sunset or sunrise, what you see doesn't really compare to how it turns out on your phone.
Right.
But in this instance, it actually did the opposite. It took what I thought was in my mind and what I saw and actually made it better, not through Photoshop trickery, but through light and physics and learning how to use the gear. And that photo was only made possible because I had used this same ND filter and the ND filter on my Fuji. I had used those repeatedly over the past year. Specifically, I've really tried to use those more so that when this opportunity came around, I was ready for it. I didn't know it was going to come around, but there it was. And I was able to use everything I had learned to make this photo. And even basic things like, how do you compose that photo?
Mm-hmm.
Do you put the sun in the center? Do you put it off to the side? Do you center it horizontally or do you put it down below a little bit or up? So one of the things about photography that I'm sure you've noticed that I want to encourage beginners who are unsure about this, when the moment hits that you have an amazing photo opportunity, that's when all that learning and practice all comes into place. You never know when you'll need to know when you'll never know when you'll need those skills of aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, but in composition and colors and light and shadow. But if you continue learning all this stuff, when the moment hits that you have a amazing photo opportunity, all of those skills will be built up in you so that you can take that amazing photo. Otherwise, when that moment hits that you suddenly have the chance to take this amazing photo, but you're playing around with your camera settings like, oh man, should I make my aperture large or small? I don't remember. How do I control ISO again? Oh, my camera's in, do I shoot manual? How do I do focus peaking? What I'm supposed to use that, but what do I do? You won't have to deal with all that because you will have practiced all of this, even just taking pictures of your kids and plants in your front yard. Learn those fundamentals and continue practicing those. And you might not be a National Geographic award-winning photographer, but you'll be building your skills up so that when you have the opportunity to take an amazing photo, you can do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure to, the same thing, like get a camera, start taking great photos right away. And as we all know, it just simply doesn't happen that way. So I like that. Yeah. Continue to work at it and you can only get better. It's not like you're going to become worse at photography by shooting every single day. That's just not going to happen. But I want to go back to what you had said earlier about, last year going through the pandemic, feeling in a bit of a creative rut, which I agree with. I was in the same boat as you. There was many days where you're just like, it's the same thing today. I'm just at home. What am I doing here? So in what ways, now that, things are starting to go on the up and up again, in what ways have you found that your photography has changed by taking a little bit of a break during the pandemic?
I think I've actually been able to go back to those earlier times when everything was fresh and new. There were times during the pandemic when I would go a week, 2 weeks without really taking any pictures. And it was kind of a bummer. And one of the things about Weekly 50, we discussed this the last time I was on your show. I schedule posts in advance. So as of today, we're recording this near the end of July. I have posts scheduled until the end of August. So I can take a week or two off and I'm okay. They will still continue to be published. Normally I continue taking photos. So I'm always building up my collection of images. Man, during the pandemic, there were times when I was just like, I'm not feeling it. And even walking around with my camera and my kids and my wife, it was just not happening. And some days are like that when you just don't feel that creative energy at all. And that happened more during the pandemic than it has probably at any other point since I've started taking pictures. And I don't know that it's done. Like you said, things are looking up. And I hope they continue to go up. But I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now, 6 months from now. I think having gone through this experience with this pandemic has taught me more about the value of simple everyday things and capturing these moments that might not seem all that great, but it's helped me kind of reorient myself and refocus myself and refocus my expectations. I took a big social media hiatus during the pandemic. I quit logging on to, I haven't been on Instagram in months. And when I do, I will just quickly post a weekly 50 photo and then log off. I'm almost never on Facebook. I found that the social media wasn't helping because it didn't make the pandemic go away. All it did was make me feel terrible about myself for not doing
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. I wish that I could just do the same thing. Just say, oh, I'm done with this and then never get back on. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. And I felt like every photo I took was just bad compared to what I was seeing on Instagram. And it was bad for my mental health to be on social media. So I didn't delete my accounts. I just stopped logging into social media for a while. And that helped a lot too, because suddenly I didn't have any sort of expectations. I wasn't comparing my photos to anyone else's, just doing it for me again. And so it was almost like a reset of my mental state back to the beginning of 2012 when I got my camera, and helped me kind of appreciate a lot of these normal everyday things, and especially the people in my life. And even if we're not doing anything spectacular, going climbing mountains or anything, I still have every reason in the world to take pictures of my kids, because I don't know how much time do we have? No one knows, but these are people who are important to me. So I'm going to take pictures of them. So
I love that. Do you think that your photography is going to change going forward? Like, is there anything that you could point to? Maybe, I've seen a lot of photographers like discover new skills, say during the pandemic or whatever, and now like their thing is that, whether it be flash or whatever it is. Is there anything that you have found, even just in the way that you described your social media detox, I suppose, right there, that you're going to change going forward that's going to help you with your photography?
I don't know that I have anything in mind. And maybe that's not, maybe that's a cop-out answer, but there are some things I would like to do that I am limited by my gear. For a while I was looking at a Sigma 60-600 lens, and it's like an insane zoom lens. I ended up getting a new bike instead. And I use that bike every day, whereas the lens, I'm not sure I would use it every day. Maybe I'll still get that lens. I'm not sure, but I think if there's something that I would say I want to do more, it's take more pictures of this almost sounds not that interesting, but take more pictures of the people in my life. So even I found myself not getting out the Fuji as much as I have in the past. So not getting even my phone out, and just letting a lot of things happen without me taking pictures of them. And there's really no need for that. I want to be more intentional about photographing everyday things, and not letting those things be unworthy of having a picture. You can't ever get that time back. And I think 10, 15 years from now, that's probably something that I will wish I had done a little more, especially during the pandemic, even when we were stuck at home for days on end. And literally we had a couple days this winter where we didn't leave the house because it was like below zero for several days. So there's still things to take pictures of and memories that I want to look back on later. And I'd like to be more intentional about doing that, about taking the camera and photographing even things that I might think are boring and uninteresting. I think I'll be glad I did that years from now. And you mentioned my Lightroom catalog before. I checked the other day. I have about 140,000 photos in my Lightroom catalog, and most of those are people in my life. And someone might say, well, do you really need all those photos? And no, but I want them, and storage
Right.
space is really cheap. So might as well have them.
I
So,
love that. I was
yeah.
thinking back to my own parents and like their photos and my grandparents and whatnot. And
Mm,
then every photo that they ever took it was at a wedding, it was at a family reunion, it was at
yeah.
some sort of event.
Uh,
And I'm always drawn to, like, if you find one time I found like I think they just called it like a photo dump. Like they just found a bunch of old photos from like the 70s and 80s. And these were just like everyday life photos, the cars that were driving
uh-huh.
by, what the decor of inside people's houses looked like, what a McDonald's looked like in the 80s, like all these things that they're not
Yeah.
important. Like you don't care at that time. But
Uh-huh.
then here we are, 30, 40 years later, and you look at these photos and you just think, like, this is a window into a different dimension. And while this photo in particular doesn't really mean anything to me, it's still of interest. And I think that alone is worth it. Like like
Yeah.
you said, I mean, storage is cheap enough. Like, why not take it? Why not document it and just see what the future holds for us
Yeah.
when we get there? I love that so much. I love it.
Yeah. There's that bit of conventional wisdom that used to be bandied about online a lot, where people would say, well, if you're taking a photo, then you're not present in the moment. And I
Hmm.
get that, but I think there's a lot of moments I wish I could remember better, but I can't, because I didn't take a picture of them. So
Right. Yeah.
um, I might have been present in the moment, so to speak, but I don't really remember anything about that moment because I left my camera on the shelf. Well, I don't want to do that. I want
Yeah.
to be more intentional about taking these everyday pictures, because at the end of the day, what matters to me isn't the photos on Weekly 50. That's how I learned to be a better photographer. What matters is the people in my life whose pictures I have. So
I'm there with you. For some reason, whenever I look at a photo, I remember taking that photo. I remember being there and
mhm,
taking that photo.
me too.
So I think photos actually help me be more present or be more intentional with how I'm interacting with the world. But everybody's different, so who knows? Who
Yep,
knows?
that's right.
Yeah. Simon, I want to say thank you for coming on today again and sharing everything that you did. I love your insight. I love your perspective on photography and the way that you capture the world. For everybody who's interested in learning more about you and seeing some of your photos, where can we find you online?
It's a great question. You won't find me on a whole lot of social media.
I love it.
You'll find me at weekly50.com. That's weeklyfifty.com. You'll also find me on YouTube, and I answer every comment on my photos. So if you leave a comment on the blog, I'll respond to it. It might take me a few days, but I'll respond. If you leave me a comment on YouTube, I will respond. I really like I've got a few people who have been commenting on my photos for years, and I love it. I knowing that some photo I took might be interesting to someone else, or even better, might have helped someone else learn to be a better photographer. That's one of the best feelings you can have. So uh, on YouTube, well, you can just go to weekly50.com and then click on the YouTube link. Or if you're already on YouTube, I think if you just search Weekly 50, my blog or my channel probably comes up. And if anyone wants to talk more, I think my webpage has a contact link. If not,
It
just
does. Yeah.
all right, good. Good. And Raymond, I'll share that sunset photo with you. And if anyone sees that sunset photo, just know that there's 10 years of experience that went into that photo. And you might not even like it. Whoever's listening to this, you might not even think it's that great, but I think it's great. And it's not just a one-off snapshot. That photo is what happens when you learn and grow and focus on those fundamentals, so that when the moment happens, you are able to capture it.
As usual, Simon just does a fantastic job of talking about photography and sharing his ideas on photos. And what I love is that, like, obviously Simon is very grounded in why photography is important to him, but also has a very strong technical knowledge of how to capture photos. And I think that he does an equally good job of being able to describe both of those things and put it together. And it just gets me excited for photography, because I know, there in fact, right now I'm kind of in a funk when it comes to photography, and I just haven't been taking many photos of the kids, and just like everyday life things. Like I bought an X100V so that I could walk around with it and use it as my everyday camera, and it's been, maybe 2 months since I actually brought it out with me somewhere just to take those same everyday photos. But I think talking to Simon today really, once again, sparked that fire, got me excited for the purpose of photography. Sometimes we ask ourselves, why are we taking this photo? Why is this photo important? Is it important? And if not, why are we taking this photo? But at the end of the day, every photo that we take is important. We may not realize it now, or tomorrow, or next month, or next year, or, within the next 10, 20 years. But at some point, a photo is going to be important. And today we're just, capturing the attention of tomorrow, if that makes sense. Does that work? We're capturing the attention of tomorrow. Yeah, that works. That works. And again, this conversation just really reminded me of that and kind of gave me the go ahead that I can just be okay with taking some bad photos. Just bring out the camera and just keep that skill going. Keep that, portion of my creative life going, and keep that interesting. So again, truly enjoyed this episode. I would love to hear your biggest takeaway from this episode with Simon. You can do so. You can share it in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. Go ahead, come on in. Let's talk photography. I want to hear your thoughts, and I want to see some of your photos. So that is it. Until next week, I want you to get out. I want you to shoot as much as possible, even if it's a boring photo. That's okay. Simon says it's okay. It's okay. Obviously, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.